everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive. Today we're digging into the case of Germaine Charlo. She's a missing Indigenous woman from Montana. And this deep dive is going to be a little unique.
Go.
How so? Well, our sources aren't exactly straightforward. We're actually pulling from a podcast that did its own deep dive.
A deep dive on a deep dive.
Exactly. They covered a 48 hours episode about Germaine, so it's like a concentrated dose of information. But really, Germaine's case, it's just one example of a much bigger problem, The crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women. It's something you don't hear enough about.
You're absolutely right. It's a crisis that's been hidden for far too long. And if you look at the numbers, it really paints a disturbing picture, In Montana, Native Americans only make up about 6% of the population, but they account for almost a quarter of all missing person cases.
Wait, seriously? A quarter?
24% to be exact. It's a shocking disparity, and it's not just a coincidence. There are some serious historical and systemic factors at play here.
Wow. I knew it was an issue, but I had no idea the numbers were that stark.
Okay, so one of the things that really stood out to me from these sources, it was this recently released video footage. It shows Germaine leaving a bar with her ex-boyfriend on the night that she disappeared.
Ah, yes. That footage was a major development in the case.
But here's the thing. This footage is 6 years old, and the police just now decided to release it. What took them so long?
It's a good question. Holding back evidence like that, especially from the family, it's a questionable tactic.
For sure. Were they trying to protect someone, or did they just completely mess up the initial investigation?
It definitely raises questions about how law enforcement handles these cases. They say they hope releasing the video now will encourage someone to come forward with information, but still, it's 6 years later.
Yeah, like how much good can that really do at this point? And the podcast mentioned that Germaine's aunts, they actually watched the footage for the first time with the 48 Hours crew, and right away they noticed something about her body language. They believe she was trying to get away from her ex-boyfriend.
Exactly. So it makes you think, what if they had shown the family this footage earlier?
It could have made a huge difference. The family often has a deeper understanding of a missing person's behavior than anyone else. Germaine's family said that they knew something was wrong the moment they couldn't reach her by phone. She was always connected, always on social media.
So they felt it in their gut right from the start.
Exactly. And although no suspects have been officially named, they firmly believe that they know what happened.
That's just heartbreaking. Shifting gears a little bit, there's this one person who seems to be doing everything he can in this case. Detective Guy Baker. He actually volunteered to take on Germaine's case.
And went above and beyond to raise awareness, didn't he?
Yeah, he even put his personal cell phone number on billboards with Germaine's picture on them. That's dedication you don't see every day.
Detective Baker seems incredibly committed to finding Germaine. He's even said that he won't retire until she's found. But you see, statistically speaking, most missing persons are eventually found.
Okay, but
there's this small percentage, about 2%, that just go cold. And unfortunately, Germaine's case has fallen into that category.
Yeah, that's rough. And on top of that, she was last seen on the Flathead Reservation, which is massive, over 1 million acres.
It really is vast.
Finding someone out there, it's got to be like searching for a needle in a haystack.
It's incredibly challenging. They've mentioned doing meticulous grid searches, but even then, it's so much ground to cover,
It's just, I can't even imagine what her family must be going through. 6 years of this.
It's a roller coaster of emotions, especially around holidays and birthdays. It sounds like they are just devastated. One of her aunts, Valinda, described the grief like this weight on her heart, making it hard to even breathe.
That's just, I can't even, ugh. And then there's this dream that Valinda had where Germaine actually appeared to her.
And told her that her body is in an area called Ivoro.
Right. Dreams can be powerful, right?
They can be incredibly powerful, especially in Native American cultures where that connection to the land and the spirits is so strong.
And the podcast mentioned that the 48 Hours team, they actually experienced some weird stuff while filming, like flickering lights, even a random rainbow.
And then the lights flickered again back in the conference room while they were reviewing the episode.
So, do you think there could be something more to this, something we don't fully understand?
It makes you wonder, doesn't it?
It really does.
Whether you believe in the supernatural or not, you can't deny the impact these experiences had on the people involved. And for Valinda, that dream was a real communication from Germaine. It's something she holds on to.
Okay, yeah. And you know what? I think we need to dive deeper into the investigation itself. There's so much to unpack.
I agree. Let's get into it.
Okay, so we've talked about how tough it is to search on a reservation as big as Flathead. But I'm kind of curious about the nuts and bolts of these investigations. Like what are the actual steps they take? What kind of technology do they use?
Well, it's a pretty involved process, and it can change depending on the specifics of the case. But usually investigators start by gathering as much info as they can about the missing person, their habits, relationships, last known whereabouts, that sort of thing.
Makes sense. So they're building a profile?
Right. They'll interview family, friends, look at phone records, social media activity. They basically try to put together a timeline of everything leading up to when the person vanished.
Okay, that makes sense. But in a case like Germaine's, I mean, it's been 6 years. How do they even pick up a trail after all this time? Wouldn't it have gone cold by now?
It definitely makes things harder, but it doesn't mean the case is unsolvable. Sometimes investigators will go back and look at old evidence, maybe interview witnesses again, or they might use new technology that wasn't available before.
Oh, like what?
Well, there have been some big advancements in DNA analysis and forensic techniques. Those could potentially uncover new clues.
So it's like a constant reevaluation.
Exactly. They have to adapt as new information or technology becomes available. And of course, in a rural area like the Flathead Reservation, there are unique challenges.
Yeah, we talked about the size, but what
Well,
else?
you've got the vast terrain, limited resources, and then there are jurisdictional issues that can pop up when you're dealing with tribal lands.
Ah, right. The jurisdictional issues. Can you explain that a little more?
Sure. Tribal lands have their own laws, their own law enforcement agencies, and sometimes that can create complications when it comes to working with outside groups like the FBI or state police.
So, like, who's in charge?
It can get murky, but clear communication and cooperation between everyone involved is essential.
Because if they're not on the same page, things could slip through the cracks.
Exactly. And sadly, we've seen that happen too many times in cases involving missing and murdered Indigenous women. The podcast actually touched upon the lack of media attention these cases get, compared to cases involving, say, a white woman.
Yeah, it's like there's a hierarchy of whose lives are considered more important.
It's a troubling reality,
Mm.
and it reflects those deeper biases and inequalities in our society. The red handprint symbol activists use. It's a powerful reminder of all the voices that have been silenced for so long.
A symbol we should all be aware of. Going back to Germaine's case specifically, was there any indication that the police didn't take it seriously in the beginning?
Well, according to the podcast, Germaine's family felt that law enforcement wasn't as responsive as they hoped early on, like their concerns weren't being heard.
It's easy to see how that could happen, especially with the history of how Indigenous communities have been treated.
Right. There's already a deep mistrust of law enforcement in many of these communities. And when they feel like their loved ones are being dismissed, it just makes that mistrust worse.
It's a vicious cycle. But in this case, we has Detective Baker. He wasn't even the original investigator, but he specifically requested to be involved.
And he's vowed not to retire until she's found.
Talk about commitment. It makes you wonder what drives someone to dedicate themselves to a case like this for so long. I mean, he knows the odds are stacked against him.
I think it speaks volumes about his character. He's compassionate, he's dedicated to justice, and he refuses to let this case fade away.
He's a real bright spot in all of this. But realistically, how much can one detective, even someone as dedicated as Baker, accomplish? We've already talked about how hard it is to search the reservation, the lack of resources, the jurisdictional issues.
It's certainly an uphill battle, but I think there's something to be said for persistence. His commitment sends a message. Germaine's life matters. Her story deserves to be told. And someone is still fighting for her.
A glimmer of hope. But we can't ignore that statistically, Germaine's case is one of those that might never be solved.
It's true. But remember, statistics don't tell the whole story. Every case is different.
So there's always a chance.
Absolutely. There's always a chance that new evidence could surface. Someone might remember something, or a new technology could change everything.
Okay, I like that. There's still hope. But in the meantime, I keep thinking about Germaine's family. We talked about their grief, but what about just the emotional roller coaster, the not knowing, the wondering?
It's a constant trauma, really. They're stuck in this limbo, never knowing for sure what happened.
And then there's that dream Belinda had, the one where Germaine appears and mentions Evero. Do you think there could be something to that, or is it just wishful thinking?
Well, it's hard to say for sure, but I think it's important to respect what Belinda believes and what she experienced. For her, that dream was a real communication from Germaine. Who knows, maybe it does hold some kind of key to the truth.
It's definitely a mystery. And then there are those strange events the 48 Hours crew experienced, the flickering lights, the rainbow, like
Right.
some kind of presence. Could those things be connected to the case somehow?
It's possible. It's interesting that those things seem to happen when they were really digging into Germaine's story. Maybe there's a spiritual element we don't fully grasp.
Makes you wonder if we limit ourselves by only focusing on the physical evidence. Maybe there are other ways of knowing, other perspectives we need to consider.
That's a good point. We can get so caught up in logic and science that we forget about the intangible aspects of a situation.
Right. And maybe in a case like Germaine's, where there's not a lot of physical evidence, those intangible things might hold the key to the truth.
It's an interesting thought. What if there are other cases out there that could benefit from a more holistic approach?
Yeah.
Looking not just at the what and the how, but also the why and the who.
It's worth considering for sure. If we only pay attention to what we can see and touch, we could be missing crucial pieces.
Exactly. Maybe those pieces lie beyond our current understanding. And maybe being open to the unknown, to those possibilities that seem far-fetched, is what will ultimately lead us to the truth in cases like Germaine's.
It's funny, we started this deep dive focusing on the investigation, the methods, the stats, and now we've kind of circled back to the human element at the heart of it all.
It makes sense, right? Because
Yeah.
in the end, these cases are about people, families that have been torn apart, communities that have been shattered, a young woman whose life was tragically cut short. We can't forget that.
Absolutely. And speaking of the human side of things, Valinda shared another story in the podcast that I thought was really powerful.
Oh, what was that?
So for a long time, Valinda would actually set a place for Germaine at the dinner table. Like she was still there.
Oh, wow.
It's just such a powerful image, This enduring hope that she'll come home.
It really speaks to the strength of the human spirit, that unwavering belief that they'll be reunited, even when everything points to the contrary.
Yeah. And it makes you think about hope, doesn't it? What is hope, really? Is it denial? Or is it something deeper that keeps us going when things are dark?
I think hope is a complex thing. It can be a source of strength, It can motivate us, guide us through difficult times. In cases like this, where there are no easy answers, hope can be what keeps a family together, what keeps them from giving up.
It's a lifeline. And it makes me think about responsibility, too. We talked about law enforcement's responsibility, but what about the media? Don't they have a role in shedding light on these stories, giving them the attention they deserve?
Absolutely. The media has a huge responsibility to report on these cases
Yeah.
and to hold those in power accountable. The Gabby Petito case, it showed how powerful media attention can be.
Yeah.
It can rally public support, push law enforcement to act, but it also showed us the huge difference in how missing white women are covered compared to missing Indigenous women. That needs to change.
It does. And you know what? What about us? What about our responsibility as individuals? What can we do?
We can do a lot, actually. We can educate ourselves, share information, support organizations that are fighting for justice, contact our representatives. Every voice matters. Every action can make a difference, no matter how small.
I think this deep dive has been really eye-opening. We started with Germaine's story, but it's so much bigger than that. It's about a whole system that's broken, an injustice that just keeps happening.
Yeah. We need to acknowledge the biases and the prejudices that have silenced Indigenous voices for so long. We have to face the truth about our past if we want to create a future where everyone is valued and protected equally.
It's about justice. It's about accountability. It's about seeing the humanity of those who have been ignored and forgotten.
And it's about remembering Germaine Charlo. Her story, her family's search for answers, their fight for justice, it represents the fight for all missing and murdered Indigenous women.
A fight we should all join. So to everyone listening, we hope this deep dive has given you something to think about. Maybe it's even made you a little uncomfortable. But most importantly, we hope it motivates you to learn more, to speak up, to act. Because Germaine's story, and the stories of all the other missing and murdered Indigenous women, they deserve to be heard. They deserve to be remembered, and their families deserve justice.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Their lives matter, their stories matter, and their families deserve answers.